game-changing discussions on the big ideas that shape our thinking. This is One-to-One.
So what does it take to hold the line when the world is at its most vulnerable? Where does leadership find clarity when every decision carries consequences for millions? My guest today has lived those questions at the front lines of public health leadership across 3 continents. Dr Chikwe Ihekweazu is Executive Director of the World Health Organization's Health Emergencies Program, former founding head of the Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence Hub in Berlin, and the first Director General of Nigeria's Center for Disease Control. Chikwe Ihekweazu, welcome to One-to-One.
Great to be on your show, Tokes.
Thank you for joining us.
Quite a journey.
Yes, quite. I'd rather thought that we might have to go all the way to Geneva or maybe even Berlin to fetch you. But here we are in Lagos, Nigeria. So let's dive straight in. Chikwe, you are Executive Director, World Health Organization Health Emergencies Program. You're leading the WHO's global preparedness and response to health emergencies across the organization's 3 levels, HQ, regions, and country offices. Previously, you were Assistant Director General and founding head of the WHO's Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence Hub in Berlin. Sounds a bit like code breaking. Blechny comes to mind.
Well, yeah, the term is used in different ways.
Absolutely. You've been very intricately associated with epidemic intelligence for much of your career. And of course, we'll come back to that later on. You've served as Assistant Regional Director for Africa, and you were in that role between February and June last year, following an unexpected vacancy that occurred after the passing of Dr. Faustin Ndugulele of Tanzania. He died in 2024, didn't he? Did you know him personally?
I knew personally a fair bit, and it was a tragic loss of a dear colleague who had actually won an election to lead WHO in the region. But it was an absolute privilege to sit in that role for a few months.
Absolutely. You're an infectious disease epidemiologist by training, and you're widely recognized as a systems builder, someone who has strengthened public health institutions, outbreak readiness, and epidemic intelligence capacity, first nationally, of course, here in Nigeria, and then globally through your various appointments at the World Health Organization. Perhaps best known for scaling and professionalizing the Nigeria Center for Disease Control during a period of repeated outbreaks, so we say, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic. You were the NCDC's first Director General. You were appointed to lead the agency in 2016. But it's fair to say that you already led responses to outbreaks of Lassa fever, meningitis, yellow fever. So you're not by any means a one-trick pony. Quite famously, of course, COVID-19. And so, Chikwe, I've left anything out. Here's my question at this point. Who is Chikwe Ihekweazu? Just in case.
So thanks for that. To be honest, you've articulated a fairly sometimes dramatic career in public health. But the truth is, I never started my career thinking I'd even be in public health. So I think like many of us, I trained to be a physician. I look forward to actually being a surgeon. And that was the career path I'd chosen. But a few set of circumstances took me into public health, and I found this incredibly fulfilling career where there are no right or wrong answers to big complex problems. There are different approaches to solve it, and I just love the complexity and the challenge of this space, and have chosen that. So in a way, professionally, I've drifted from a very beginning, an exciting career in clinical medicine in Nigeria in tough circumstances in the Southeast. Did my house job in Aba, did my youth service in the police college here in Ikeja, and ultimately veered into public health, and I found my calling in it.
Of course. And we shall, of course, explore that drift as you say. So let's talk a bit about your work. So at the WHO, leadership isn't just about Geneva, is it? It's about aligning headquarters, regions, country offices under pressure, immense pressure, quite a lot of the time. You've led across all three. So let's go back and begin at the moment where it all became quite real for you. Okay? You stepped into the NCDC for the first time as Director General in 2016. What was the most uncomfortable truth you discovered about Nigeria's epidemic preparedness at that point?
Well, Tokes, I still remember that week because it was so vivid in my consciousness, Of course, first it was getting the appointment and the excitement it generated. You have to remember this period was, the early months of the Buhari era and the hope and anticipation that came with it that finally Nigeria was turning the corner and we had a leader that we all thought will take us to this promised land. And, I was part of that. And when I was appointed, our generation, all the friends we knew, I had no opportunity to even reflect on the opportunity because, the congratulatory messages were intense. Everyone transferred their hopes for the country to my shoulder.
Yes.
And I got to this place in Abuja. I walked around our offices and we had 70 staff only, including drivers, security, everyone, total of 78. I asked questions, I looked around the offices. It was depressing in terms of just what I found, and there were a few bright lights there, but they had no mission, no vision, no understanding of their roles. I would try and drive conversation and drive questions, and so it was very depressing, to be honest. But at the same time, I had worked one way or the other. This was my 20th year in public health, and all those 20 years had been working in national public health agencies in Germany, the UK, and then in South Africa. So I kind of knew what needed to be done. So I think after a week, I went back to Vivian, my dear wife, and, we talked about this. And we said, listen, we're here. We will make it work. And the journey started. So, we started building. And, sometimes it's easier to build from a low base.
Correct.
Because you do see results. And we did see the results. And then the results became self-fulfilling after a few months. But it was a very tough beginning, and I don't think NCDC was unique. The public sector institutions, I wouldn't be surprised if you walk into many of them today and you get the same feeling.
Of course. And of course, we'll dip a bit more into that in the course of this conversation. So I'd like, therefore, to come back again to the NCDC. You arrived, and I make a lot of your arrival each time I lead up to these questions, don't I? You arrived to lead an institution, an organization that was young, fragile, largely untested. What weaknesses did you find were hardest to change? Not because they were scientific, but we've just been talking a lot about other matters, but because they were essentially political.
So let me answer this question in two ways. Firstly, the biggest challenge I found with the 70 people I found at NCDC is that many of them did not believe in themselves. They did not think that they had what it took to do the work that was required of them, and that it was okay to just stay under the radar, keep your heads down, get whatever small salary we could get, and just, manage, So there wasn't any internal motivation to deliver on any mandates, right? That was one. Secondly, there wasn't any expectation from the people that put you there to deliver on anything. When I came, no one told me, listen, this is your vision. This is our vision as a government for NCDC. These are your expectations. These are what you should deliver. So you are left to your own capacities, your own ambitions, for better or for worse. So it was up to me in that case, but it would be up to any leader in a parastate or in most places in Nigeria. You make a decision when you're appointed. There's very little expectation of our leadership, at least from my experience, on what to do. So I had to, and we all have to, both set those expectations for the people you lead, but also derive the expectations from the people that are appointed.
Did you struggle with that?
I struggled with it. I deeply struggled with it, because, what were you there for? So, but we got round to it, and we set on a plan. I literally activated every network I had prior to coming in NCDC to come and help me fulfill its mission. Every colleague I had that worked in the previous places I worked for, that worked for WHO, that worked for the international, I called them up. I said, how can you help? I got, there's an institution called the Tony Blair Institute. I happen to know a few people there. I called them, listen, I know you do organizational transformation. Can you come and help me? They gave me 2 consultants to come and work with me pro bono for 6 months. They sat with me. They developed the first strategic plan for NCDC. We launched it. I brought all the team together. We convinced the federal government to allow us to recruit a few more people. The first set of 100 recruits, mostly young people. And so we, and then I have lots of, I came in, the leader of NCDC was, prior to me, was sending emails with Yahoo email addresses. I said, I will not send my first formal email with Gmail or Yahoo, that we will send this up. I found a few young people, I literally twisted their arms. We set up an email. It sounds rudimentary, but it still happens today. Many government officials today, as we speak, still send with Gmail address.
Absolutely.
Ministers still send with Gmail addresses. So the first website that we set up was set up within a month of starting at NCDC. That is the same website up today at NCDC. So there are many things that if you don't believe you can do it and you've had no exposure of where it works, you don't know what you don't know. So you can't create what you never know, what you've never known. So I was lucky to come into an institution similar to those that I'd worked in, and there wasn't too much motivation or staff or resources, but we pushed and created something that, I know we'll get to the pandemic, but just to say that today, retrospectively, you could think that we spent 3 years preparing for a pandemic. But of course, we didn't know a pandemic was coming. We spent 3 years building an institution that I think Nigerians deserve. And, I shudder every day. I think if the COVID-19 pandemic had started 3 years earlier, what could we have done as a country? I still get goosebumps thinking about, July 2016 when I arrived. If that pandemic had started in January 2017, not January 2020, what could we have done? And so those 3 years that we spent building that institution, building a public sector institution that was ready to serve and stand up and not embarrass our country, was the work we did quietly in the 3 years before people began to hear about NCDC in January 2020.
Incredible insight, and you're absolutely right. And you're beginning to use this as a window into the state of our public institutions, and of course we'll get there as well. But I'd like to learn from you at this point. What was it you learned about attempting to or reforming a system that seemed configured almost by design, bureaucratically, culturally, politically, to resist change?
So, Topher, I'm not even sure the word is to resist. It's almost like we're designed to fail.
I'm trying to avoid it.
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
we have got to put this. Correct. I'm privileged now to have done this for 5 years. So, we all talk about how we wish Nigeria to work, and sometimes it doesn't, right? But having been there for 5 years, I think I have the legitimacy to speak about it, right? Let me just give an example that anyone leading a parastatal will recognize. The smallest part of your budget is your recurrent expenditure limits. Most parastatals struggle with that. But, every parastatal has to buy petrol, buy diesel, pay for electricity, pay for band A like we do. All these expenses where if you're not resourced to do that, you have other lines of expenditure in your capital budgets. You have to then use resources from your capital expenditure to pay for your recurrent expenses. Once you do that, you have broken the rules of government. They come after you, and the rest follows, right? So if we don't start thinking, how do we actually be honest with ourselves in terms of what does a parastatal require to run? What do you need to pay your staff? What do you need to pay your bills? Then budget for it and stick to it. Then, we haven't started. If we continue to pay our civil servants, I signed off on payments to staff for 200,000 naira, 300,000 naira a month. And these were technical staff. I'm not talking about drivers or cleaners. I'm talking about technical staff. And then how do I, in all honesty, expect them to deliver? And they have school fees to pay like I do. They have homes, bills to pay. So I do think at some point we have to have an honest conversation as a society. Do we want our public sector to work? And what do we need to do to enable it work? I think until we do that, we will have parastatals that shine and decline, which is what happens. We will not have any part of our public sector that will grow consistently and sustainably into the future if we don't address the fundamentals. And so far, I don't think we're ready to have that conversation.
Absolutely. So you just highlighted the fact that we can't talk about any of this in isolation. It all exists within a certain political context, a certain administrative context, and there's an expectation that we do the right thing. If you're in a position of responsibility, you deliver. So let's move on.
But to do the right thing takes a lot of courage. As when I got into government, you try to do the right thing, people abuse you, you've come with your Oyibo tendency, this is Nigeria, this is how you should be doing it. You're educated about the country that you love and you want to serve. And you can't resist all the time, because if you resist all the time, you fail. So you have to adapt to some extent and resist to some extent and find your own sweet spot. But nobody, you define the risk that you're ready to take. And everyone leading an organization, the public sector in Nigeria, is taking risks every day in running that organization, because you can fail different ways. You can fail by saying, listen, I will not be flexible on anything and follow the book, Tokes. You will not move. Yeah. So you need a little bit of flexibility, and in that lies the banana peel for every public sector leader, especially in our beloved country.
So it's a very delicate balance, isn't it? You're really walking knife edge.
Absolutely, every single day.
Every single day. So I'd like to ask, even in spite of what you already described, where precisely, with benefit of hindsight, would you say that governance, not science, let Nigeria, perhaps even Africa, down the most during that pandemic?
Yeah, in terms of governance, I think one area we struggled with in Nigeria specifically was our federal structure. I just referred to them, Mr. President, but the reality is we had 36 states, right? And there were 2 states in Nigeria that basically resisted the instructions of the federal government. One was Cross River, and the other was Kogi. Cross River eventually came around and followed our guidance.
Why? What was the rationale for that resistance?
It was so, the rationale was a perceived understanding of the science of what was happening better than the expertise from NCDC. But in credit to Cross River, they came around. In Kogi, the governor at the time insisted, listen, there's no COVID in Kogi. A state that had 9 states, borders with 9 states, stopped us from testing. Literally, with the forces of the state, transported and evicted an NCDC team that had come into Kogi to Lokoja to support and escorted them back to Abuja. I went on national TV explaining and denigrating the work we're doing. So I think one of the big governance challenges is how do we ensure that in a federal structure where there's a national crisis, and this cannot be unique to NCDC, it could be a security crisis, it could be a transport crisis, it could be anything, that we still have a mechanism to coordinate our efforts. So that's, I think, one of the big governance challenges that we faced. The other one, I think, is a much more medical example, I think, is what we got over was, the introduction of new medicines into the portfolio that we use. No matter how hard I tried to explain to Nigerians and our colleagues that there was no value in giving medicines like ivermectin or zinc or at some point chloroquine, many of our colleagues insisted that they had, it worked for them and their patients, as they say. Anecdotal evidence, yes, absolutely. And there's no mechanism to stop this. And, it continued right up to the end of the pandemic. The ivermectin became one of the largest selling medicines in Nigeria, used for a condition where it had basically no effect and probably caused harm. So there are all these challenges, but, I think they're all part of a developing economy, and hopefully we find ways of addressing this into the future.
So Chikwe, you wrote at some stage, precisely in August 2024, it was published, book called An Imperfect Storm. And here I am, leafing through the pages here. A very well-written book, but you co-authored with your lovely wife, Viviane Ihekweazu. I read this really as a very deeply personal account, not just of your leadership, but of leadership, and I dare say institutions under pressure. To what extent did you feel that you needed to write this book at that time?
Yeah, thanks, Stokes. I think the first answer to your question is most of the credit actually goes to Vivian. Vivian is, like you said, my dear wife. She runs a health advocacy communications firm called Nigeria Health Watch. But, it was really from the stories I told her every evening. I would get back from work, sometimes 11, 12, sometimes later. And every evening she would wait up for me in the sitting room. The first obvious question was, how was your day? And, I would tell her story after story, and, her jaw will drop and then drop even further at the stories I was sharing about the work we're doing. And she kept notes. And those notes form the foundation of the book, An Imperfect Storm. So thanks a lot to her that we have a book today. But the other thing is, having gone through this pandemic, I felt a sense of responsibility to write about a country that worked when the country needed it to work. And unfortunately, we don't have too many examples. but having had a front seat through that period, seen a small team that most Nigerians had never heard about, stand up, respond, do their best, lead through adversity, support our leadership, support the people, gain the trust and confidence of Nigerians. I felt this was a part of our history that I had a responsibility to write. So if today you are appointed into leading a public sector parastatal or whatever leadership position in public sector, you can pick up this book, or anyone actually worried about our country, you can pick up this book and be inspired that this wasn't a story of Nigeria being saved by any group of people externally. This was a book about Nigerians that stood up during a difficult period and did not let the country down. And it was a story too important not to tell.
Yes. And of course, for me, a real life account. Almost a coming of age story, really, about growing up institutionally through that period for you and for the nation. But I'd like to ask first, I'd like you to consider this question separately. Are we as a continent still structurally disadvantaged in terms of global health security? And of course, part B of that question is who precisely benefits from the imbalance that is created?
So, Toks, I think this is a very important question. There is, of course, still a big imbalance and access to resources, access to skills and expertise. But a lot of this can be changed by us. This will not be solved by others.
Absolutely.
And in many other sectors that are driven by the private sector, whether it's financial services and tech and banking, we are leading the pack. What are the incentives that has driven our development of certain sectors that has not driven the development of science and technology in our country? And these are big societal questions that no country can develop really without doing this. What are we investing in education, in our higher institutions? Are the universities that you and I went to, are we confident to send our children to them today? If we're not, there's a problem.
There is.
So I think we are underinvesting in science. We don't take it seriously. And it's no surprise then that we are not producing the science that we need to progress. So I think it's right to advocate for equity globally, advocate for more resources globally, and complain about the imbalance globally. But I don't think we should expect the world to come down to our level.
Absolutely.
We must rise and push ourselves up to a competitive level in science. And I think sadly in most areas of scientific expertise, explorations, the research, we are falling back.
Absolutely.
I worry sometimes that our 4-year political cycles is really an impediment for progress in the health sector, because the health sector is not, progress is never rapid. You need time. No matter how good the idea is and the transformation is, you need time. You need policy consistency, leadership consistency. If there's a change in the political landscape after 4 years and a whole new set of leaders come in, the risk is that no matter how good ideas are, they never just have the time to grow.